Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think we can, so we'll begin with the first keynote. Françoise Vergès has very kindly agreed to join us. We wish you could be here, Françoise, but delighted to see you. And to open the conference, open the workshop with some wider conceptual parameters and bringing in these potential overlaps also of the post-colonial and post-socialist thinking from the point of view of feminist struggles. So Françoise Vergès is a public educator, writer, activist in anti-colonialist and decolonial feminist struggles, and a co-founder, should I just admit? With the mouse, dear. Admit. And the co-founder of the Association Decolonize the Arts. She's currently curating the school La Colonie Nomade, Fragments of Repair in Paris in connection with the Franco-Algerian artist Kader Attia's show at Utrecht, Fragments of Repair, in partnership with Bach Utrecht, which, by the way, Françoise, I'll be using in my class. So that's interesting. So her latest publications in English, The Wombs of Women, Race, Capitalism, Feminism, was published in 2020. And your current work this year, the book is Decolonial Feminism. So I guess we will get perspectives from all these books, Françoise. Delighted to have you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Good morning. I wish I could be there. Okay, before I would want to thank, I was thinking about what makes it possible. And it's what I'm going to say, it's part of my work on the invisibilization of work, of some part of work. So I'm thinking of the workers in Congo and in Asia who are making this online conversation possible. And again, I say that to underline an element of my work, how the normalization of exploitation that we don't see, as we are doing something, we don't see what is behind, and how my work is very often focused on what is under our eyes, but that we don't see. And the temporality that this moment, as we are speaking, already bring together the time of exploitation of, the kind of mineral that make all this conversation possible, this transformation, the capitalist corporation, and our own time now. So already all this entangled. So this is what already a remark I wanted to make. And then, speaking about the dynamic of time and memory and reimagining a place and agency in the impasse of the internal present, which was the argument that was given for this conversation. It was quite difficult for me. I started to suggest, a title which was Entangled Temporality in the Age of the Necrocene. But 2 days ago, I reread the argument. I say, well, why did I suggest that? Where was my mind? And so I started to say, okay, I will talk about feminist, circulation that are outside of the circulation of white North, global North feminism. But then again, during the 2 nights ago, because the night is always also the time of rethinking things, I'm thought, but no, it's really about entangled temporality. So anyway, I'm sorry if my talk today will seem like bringing these two things together, but this is what I'm trying. I'm telling this not because my hesitation are in itself very interesting, but to show how talking about temporality in very concrete ways, anchor in the analysis of growing inequality and injustices, of anti-Blackness, Islamophobia, of the destruction of the very condition of living, necessary to sustain human life, of, growing of fascism, how I find it difficult to talk about time. And it is not so much about optimism and pessimism, with what we are saying. I do not think that these notions are very useful for us. I'm thinking more about hope, how to nurture hope, to make hope a terrain for imagining how to dismantle the master house and its world. So hope is what has sustained struggle for freedom and dignity, for the humanization of the world. Hope is knowing that one day, we will be free. The hope that slave, colonized, indigenous, feminists of color, decolonial queer have built, protecting it like a fragile light in the long night of exploitation, the temporality of hope. The hope that we still need to nurture, the utopian thinking that is necessary today. We, the oppressed, the dispossessed, who have long lived in dystopia, the dystopia that European colonizers impose on the world. Since then, there have been no peace. The time has been the time of war. Peace has been just a short interlude between two wars, a moment in agreement signed by white men and some men of color around a table, suspending the moment of war. It is not that kingdom and empire before, colonial time, did not practice violence, but that European colonization and capitalism rest on the organization of humanity along racial line and have had the means to impose that division. Capitalism and domination also rest on extraction and exhaustion of life from on the life force, of millions of Black, brown, and indigenous body, and of the exhaustion of soil, forest, and river. The temporality of racial capitalism is an internal present, but is a present that contains its own limit, the exhaustion of what makes the imperialist mode of life possible, which rests on exhaustion and exploitation. Exhaustion, mental and bodily depletion, is endemic to capitalism. It premisses on extraction that produce a constant exhaustion of all form and force of living, human and animal, soil and subsoil, ocean and rivers, and our water, for the well-being of a selected few. And its history starts with colonial slavery, the extraction of millions of bodies from the African continent, the very short life that was, imposed on them on the plantation, the extraction of resources, and the exhaustion of these resources. Once a mine of gold and silver was exhausted, European colonizers moved another one, leaving behind them wasted land and wasted lives. So this economy of extraction, exhaustion, and what I call exhaustion and suffocation has been magnified by COVID-19. And we have seen the underlying health epidemic of exhaustion and psychic debility, because the imperialist mode of living is dependent on people working and living in increasingly exhausting conditions. It must be repeated that the comfort of well-being and the well-being of liberal and neoliberal white and bourgeois body, the measure is the measure of wealth, success, and good health, rests on mining to exhaustion the bodies of migrant and people of color, of mineral and fossil resources in the global south, made possible by the militarization of the police, by the extension of technology of surveillance and control, by imperialist war that leave behind wasted, contaminated lands, suffering and trauma, by colonial occupation of indigenous land and of Palestine, by terror, and the masquerading of the degradation of the environment and death as inevitable. In that regime, violence is defined by the image of suffering and not by the condition of its production. White feminism has been complicit in the regime of extraction, dispossession, exhaustion, and suffocation. It has benefited and it still benefits from this economy. Its imperialist mode of living rests on the exploitation in Black and brown body, which allow women in the global north to be feminist. Struggle yesterday and today aim at dismantling the master house and its world. Everywhere, women of color are leading the fight. They know that they will be carrying, that they carried, their mother and ancestor, but that today they are carrying the heavier burden of the current crisis, plural. We know that 40% of all women in the world today have been employed in the four most affected industry by the pandemic: restaurant, retail, hotel, and manufacturing. That 75% of them work in all unpaid care work, and that 40% of women are excluded from the paid labor market versus 6% of men. This is a condition of the imperialist way of living. Meanwhile, rich countries are spending more on anti-migrant policies than on climate crisis, whose effect will affect first women in the global south. Meanwhile, poorer countries are spending 5 times more on debt, on repaying debt, than on implementing measures against the climate crisis. There is no universal right to life. There is no universal right to breathe. There is no universal right to rest. The objectives set by white feminism, even by many of white eco-feminists, have nothing to do with dignity for all, for the humanization of the world. Their temporality rests on the belief that things will get better within the system as it is, that patriarchy will just retreat. But things cannot get better as long as the master house and its world are not dismantled. The better time, their better time, are made, on a dream that trusts the capacity of capitalism to reform itself, to soften its worst aspect. Its temporality rests on the belief of its superiority of time of Western reason and aesthetics. Decolonial temporality is different. It has produced entangled temporality, because we do live in entangled temporality of a past that is yet to be repaired, with the unrealized promise of abolition, of a past, to repair the century of damage by racial capitalism, exploitation and dispossession, and exploitation of the wombs of women of color. A present heavy with the unrepaired damage of the past and the damage that are being done every day. And a future that presents itself as futureless, damaged as we speak, threatening the possibility of human life on the planet. This entangled temporality offer then the terrain upon which to deploy our imagination for different aesthetic and different narrative. There is no future in our decolonial time without integrating the past and the present. There is no past, present, future. There is a time, not of a limitless present, but a time pregnant with the struggle of the past time and the struggle of today and the struggle for the future of imagination. This is where we are living. The difficulty of ascribing futurability in the current context rests on this understanding of past, present, future being entangled. Decolonial temporality is about then thinking about the temporality of reparation and also then of what is irreparable, what will not be repaired, what we will have to live with what wounds and what damage. It's also about creating refuge and sanctuary, to imagine strategy and to sustain hope and nurture imagination. And this refuge and sanctuary are not just in the present, they are also those who were imagined in the past and whose memory we find in the narrative, in songs and poems, or even in the nature, in what is called nature, in the what has been left, the trace left in the cities and in the landscape of the rural, of the struggle of the oppressed. Decolonial temporality is also about learning about this strategy to invent new strategy. This is what I wanted, in fact, to discuss, this entangled temporality and their relation with decolonial feminist struggle. In the presentation, there was talk about effectively what has been the global south and the global east, and the encounter between them. And I have been interested in them. It's not just I've been interested in them, but in fact, I observe them because being of Réunion Island and growing up in a communist anti-colonial family, I observe, of course, was a witness of this circulation that put European feminism on the periphery. It was very far away. What sustained hope was the circulation and encounter between women of the global south and also women in the global east. We know that, for instance, the importance, of course, of the Bandung conference in that moment, but also that how it was preceded by different moment, how it was very important, in the Baku Congress of the 20s, but also, and the presence of women there, and the different, meeting, of course, afterwards, in the Bandung Conference, which remained one of the historical moments of this different time, different temporality, has been a turning moment. In her article, Before Bandung, the Anti-Imperialist Women's Movement in Asia and the Women International Democratic Federation, Elizabeth Armstrong reminds us that Bandung was preceded by the 1947 Anti-Imperialist Women Conference, by the 1949 Conference of the Women of Asia held in Beijing, and that Bandung was followed by the 1958 Asian African Conference of Women held in Colombo, Sri Lanka. All these meetings, created effectively the circulation between, East and South. Other memoir, and I want then to talk about feminist friendship and temporality now. I think I have still 15 minutes. So I will start by, an anecdote about revolutionary feminist friendship, hope, and revolution. It is about two communist Black women in the late 1960s. In her autobiography, Angela Davis recalled that as she was returning from Cuba with a delegation of African American and Latins, they had to do a stopover in Guadeloupe, because you did not have direct flight from Cuba to the United States at the time. The French policy in Guadeloupe, Guadeloupe was a post-colonial French territory, arrested them and confiscated their passport. Angela Davis writes, I quote, "We were all accused of being agents of Cuban communism and importing propaganda to foment a revolution in this quiet island whose natives loved their French governor and had coexisted peacefully with them for so many decades. I thought to myself that it would have been a good thing to be able in such a short time to instigate such an insurrection." Sorry. I told the police that they had no right to seize our passport. We had not been officially charged with any offense. If we did not want to hand over our passport, we were told that we would expose ourselves to the prison. We were lost in this Caribbean island. We decided to surrender our passport to take advantage of our freedom to develop the means of escape. Though through contact with the captain, a few sympathetic Cubans who live on the island, we met a Black woman, a respected lawyer and leader of the Communist Party of Guadeloupe, Gertie Archimede. She was a tall woman with dark skin, keen eyes, and indomitable courage. I will never forget our first meeting. I felt I was in the presence of a very great lady. Not for the moment did I doubt that she was going to get us out of our bad posture. So this, and Gertia Charmed, so this communist and feminist Guadeloupean lawyer, got Angela Davis out of the problem, and she got their passport back. They were released and could fly back to the United States. A few years later, Davis sent a card to Archimede lamenting the fact that they would not be able to meet in Moscow for an international meeting of communist women because of a conflicting engagement. Other memoirs of women activists in the Global South show that the struggle for independence from colonial power, for liberation against fascism and military dictatorship, facilitated transnational revolutionary friendship. The life of women of color were transformed through their travel and encounter with women of the Global South and of the Global East. Activism offers opportunities that few women of color had then to travel, to speak in public, to organize, and to write. And I speak again, but I'm thinking about the communist woman I knew in Réunion Island, I met when I was a child and a teenager. These women were Black women from, popular classes, were traveling to Moscow, Berlin, Vietnam, and other places at a time when they will not, the French state will not have allowed them to travel, and they have no means to travel. And they met with women, and they came back and they engaged. It was this education in revolutionary feminist friendship that I want to underline. The kind of memoir, the kind of transformation through that women, women in the Global South encounter. This is in this temporality, in this different life, because women, for instance, in Réunion Island were living in the post-colonial French regime, racial, of exploitation and racism. And going to Moscow, Berlin, or, Hanoi, or in Budapest or Bucharest, brought them, and they were not traveling so much in France. That was what is important for me. They also traveled to India. It's very important for me that they did not go through Paris or London, that it was, directly from Réunion to these places, or from Martinique, or from Guadeloupe, or from Senegal, or from Lima, Peru, or from Mexico. This was very important, this circulation outside that this southeast route that put Europe on the periphery. And that was a source of a different feminism, so through this conference was articulated a feminism whose temporality was absolutely not that of white feminism. Sorry. Oh God. I don't know. Sorry. Right away, it was about the liberation of the whole society and, of course, the transformation of the mean of production and the condition of production and of the disparition of the North-South axis. This development of a different feminism and of revolutionary feminist friendship is extremely still today repercussion and find its echo. Feminist revolutionary friendship was about and is still about inventing collective practices, about creating ecology of care, about the politic of also thinking, elaborating what will be the politic of breathing in a world whose economy, capitalist economy, produce unbreathing, not just in the case of I can breathe and police violence, but in the fact that it produces, air pollution constantly, that it's an economy of suffocation, because as we know, more people are dying every year of air pollution than any other cause. So the question of, air, of breathing is a revolutionary question. And women know that, feminists of the Global South. The question then of, motherhood being presented differently not as a burden, as in some white feminist theory, but as another possibility of international, intergenerational connection. Feminist revolutionary friendship is about producing analysis about the different economies that affect women in the global south, of the agro-extractivist economy that effectively take away land, that privatize land and impose pesticide and ecocide. And we see also in so many parts of the world. It's about producing analysis of race and capitalism, of race, gender, and the environment, of the corporate greed, of the interconnected form of violence. It will not look at feminicide just as an expression of purely male domination, but also as the expression of violence as the organizing principle of racial capitalism. There is no racial capitalism without organized violence. And that violence pervades every part of society. Feminist revolutionary friendship is about practicing friendship, offering refuge and sanctuaries where to find some rest, where to nurture against force and courage to confront the enemy. It's about nurturing hope through sorrow and rage, through collective mourning that is a call then for justice. It's about, fighting constantly against the normalization of exploitation, whose representation is hidden. Sorry. This is what, when Sanjuta was talking about my recent work, what I've been talking about, what is not invisible, but what is invisibilized. And that work that sustains the imperialist way of life of women here in the global north, and few of them in the global south, is made possible by effectively the invisibilization, the normalization of exploitation and dispossession. This is the way it is. And the struggle has always been, for centuries, to say this is not the way it is. This is the way how it is being made, and that can be unmade. So the dismantling of the master house and his world is at the heart of that struggle. When I talk about the master house, of course, this is Audre Lorde's expression, but I want to, and we know that she was addressing white feminists and saying you cannot dismantle the master house with the master tools. But my question is, how do we dismantle the master house today? What is the decolonial practice of dismantling the master house that is still effectively with us today? The question of the plantation as the model of exploitation, the connection of the master house with the banking system and insurance system, with the trade economy, with the law of commerce, with the law about private property, with the law about, with its impact on the way science is being researched, about health, about what is clean and unclean is being produced, about what is beauty and not beauty is being produced, is not being dismantled yet. So the master house and this world is still the objective of this moment. This is not so the internal present as racial capitalism will want us to believe in a moment of constant happiness and fulfillment of the promise of consumption, of endless consumption. But it is effectively the entangled temporality of the production of exploitation, dispossession, exhaustion, and suffocation that has been constantly being fought against by the dispossessed and the oppressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Françoise. That was fascinating. And also, I think, gave us some fodder to open our minds with in the morning as we gear up, I think, for the conversations that will come. We have how much time for gathering questions? And about half an hour. So we have some time for gathering questions and comments. I just thought I'll open with a few thoughts maybe, and you could reflect a bit on that, and then we will gather questions, and do feel free to intervene, join whenever you want. Huh? Oh no, I have to look at that machine. I'm failing to do that. Yeah, I'm just thinking aloud partly here. You know, you talk about what I found fascinating for me is not only the politics and the horizons of hope and friendship, you know, the genealogies of friendship almost that you bring out, but also connected to that, the memories of friendship, talking about Bandung and these different conferences of women delegates, but also the routes of travel. And one has looked at, archives and artists also going back to, I'm thinking, what's this? Shagurika, the communists like us, that do you remember that? The Autolit group? They
Yes.
did this, I was thinking about that, how women delegates traveling from India to the Soviet Union and under the wider umbrella of the post-colonial moment. And I'm just thinking that between these genealogies of friendship, the memories of friendship that we have in the archive, or they are hidden in the archive or erased in the archive, what responsibility do we have as scholars, historians? What kind of questions should we ask to, these are embedded histories, embedded and invisible at the same time. And also what you said about the travels and transits and alternative routes, the South and Southeast, South and East that we are talking about now, these routes were there. So how, again, this point about how do we retrieve what is embedded and invisible? I think that's a wider methodological, also a theoretical question, I think, of historiographical question even. I have just one or two opening thoughts about it. The temporality of feminism, and you mentioned that it is absolute. This feminism, revolutionary feminism that you're talking about, is absolutely not that of white feminism. And I'm also thinking that so many of these feminist movements and transits and travels in the 50s, 60s were so much also entangled with the time of the post-colony, the post-colonial time, which is, at least in the 20th century, was heavily overdetermined by the time of the nation, the time of the nation state. So in a way, I'm just trying to understand how revolutionary feminist time overlaps with the anti-colonial, the post-colonial time of the anti-colonial, and what are the excesses? Does it map onto it fully? Are there excesses? Are there points where revolutionary feminist time not only does not gel with white feminism, but also with the post-colonial nation state? That's one thing. And I'm thinking, I struggle. Okay, what happens here? I have to, yes. And I'm also thinking whether I struggle a bit myself as a historian, Françoise, to think about the decolonial in the archive, because I'm still looking at decolonial as the time of decolonization. As a historian, when I'm going to the archive and I'm trying to gather material, but I'm interested, and you are the perfect person for that, to think about the horizon of the decolonial as a horizon, as almost a utopian horizon that one has to subscribe to get these embeddedness, kind of opening up these space. And I'm just wondering whether revolutionary feminism today, in what, post-COVID, not post-COVID, whatever it is, within this embeddedness, how does one think about the horizon of the decolonial?
Okay.
Vis-a-vis that. Yeah, I think I'll stop here, but maybe others could also jump in. Would you like to respond now, or maybe we can collect questions? What do you find?
Okay, it was a long question.
Sorry.
So perhaps I will try, perhaps by answering will also perhaps trigger a different question or inform the
That's good.
following question, perhaps. Yeah. There are many things I would like to answer. I mean, already, coming from, I want also to bring back anti-colonial communism. So communism is not caught into the European history, a European frame of, Gulag, not Gulag, or, all this European story. Because for me, it means why communism attracted women, who were domestics or working in the sugarcane field in Réunion, or were school teachers or things like that. So what was the dream? What was the horizon? What was, the imagination that this brought? And this, red Africa, red Indian Ocean, red Asia. How women thought about themselves in that, and what were their dreams, and not just, the dream of the nation state or, the international organization. So that's, for me, that is important. And the responsibility of the historian will be also to look at that, the kind of also what the women produce in terms, of aesthetics. I mean, the how their poetry, their literature, what was it different from other. So I want to look at that. The question of, I don't think that revolutionary feminist friendship was effectively contained into the anti-colonial and post-colonial map. I think it exceeded it, because effectively, first, I mean, most of them, they were not necessarily taken seriously by this, international organization, or we are told that they had to wait. I mean, we know the argument, and many women, many feminists in the global south have talked about it. But at the same time, their view of what was decolonization and their view of the nation state has also perhaps to be again brought back. How they saw decolonization, how they imagined decolonization, and the fact of the unfinished time of decolonization. That is effectively the decolonial. That decolonization is not just independence, but effectively freeing ourselves, what Ngugi wa Thiong'o talk about, decolonizing the mind, of what Fanon or Cabral have talked about, and of course, Black feminists and indigenous feminists. So this is, for me, this mapping, the mapping of what were this possibility, and how they thought about this entangled temporality of past, present, and future is, for me, something very important. How to find the decolonial? So I don't think, as I say, that it's the same time of the nation state. I've been, in my work on the womb of women of color, the question of that quite often in the theory, in anti-colonial theory or even post-colonial theory, there is a view of the human being as if we are always born adult, that we're born adult, full, with the possibility of thinking and working and so on, and that we don't, and when we talk about vulnerability, we talk about the vulnerability of the adult person. But I'm talking, if we think about the future and our future generation, that means that they're going to be, like babies, and babies are dependent human being. None of us here, was a full autonomous human being where we were born. Absolutely, none of us. I mean, we did not come out like that as we are today. So, and women understood that because they were confronted, and they are still confronted, women in the global north, with incredible, inequality in terms of childcare, if we want to call it like that. But even that term, I think, is very much full of a certain vocabulary of development with all its problems. But this understanding that the vulnerability, the deep vulnerability of the human being, make effectively the question of decolonization, bring it a different dimension. And that women understood that, and they still understand that, because we do know that, not all children are born equal on that planet. That if in Indonesia today babies die of COVID-19 and not in England or Germany, is because they are born already with respiratory disease and lung problem. And this is because of pollution, poverty, and malnutrition that are, effectively the cause of capitalism and racism. So this Entangled Temporalities very much, and is part for me of the decolonial revolutionary feminism. The decolonial in the archive, I mean, your last question, how to look for the decolonial in the archive, will be to look at this for me, will be to look at what exceeds, the idea of a certain imitation of the nation state with all, of course, the promise of it. But what has been the unfulfilled promise of the abolition of slavery and of national independence. And this is, for me, where the decolonial arrive. What is effectively still on the horizon? What is a form of, if we think that people in the global south have been living in dystopian time, in dystopia, and not at all. I mean, that, slavery, dispossession, colonization, extraction, and so on and so forth. And how the West has constructed an utopian literature on utopia that always ends in dystopia. It started like a beautiful dream, and it always ends because of human nature. It ends badly, and the view of the Western mind about effectively what is human nature. In the South, living in dystopia allow for a totally different vocabulary, utopian vocabulary. Totally effectively, what will be the humanization of the world? What will be to humanize the world is that effectively this terrain upon which an horizon can be built over the post-racist, post-capitalist, post-imperialist society. So the decolonial in the archive is within that constant thinking about the unfulfilled promise of the abolition and of decolonization, that we are still not there, that we still have to rehearse that possibility. And that's all the struggles of yesterday and today are this moment of rehearsal of what is possible, of a life that is possible, and of which is not the imperialist way of life. I don't know if I have answered.
Thank you so much for thinking along. We will. The floor is open for questions, comments, rambles. Yes.
Well, perhaps. Thank you very much, Françoise, for your great talk. I really enjoyed it, and also I think it was very nice to see the different intersections between the different perspectives that they were brought to us by the organizers of the events. As soon as I just started speaking, it came to my mind a novel that has been recently published by a Chilean author called Paulina Flores. Mm-hmm. It is called in Spanish Isla Decepción. I think the title would be something like that, Disappointments Islands. Mm-hmm. And what is interesting about this novel is actually addressing the very question that I think is fascinating and very topical that you were addressing, Françoise, is how women in the global south construct or configure their cultural imaginations regarding these utopian projects that they seem to have been invalidated by these grand narratives of neoliberalism, the end of history, and so on and so forth. And I really found very interesting the points that the author is making in this novel, because she's a young woman and so on, and she is from this rural perspective pointing out that we are all subjects of exploitation and different sorts of repression and brutality in the global economy. But the point she makes is it is important to recover certain utopias, that somehow were perhaps not applied in the same way in all over the world. This case of the utopia that communism represented, right? So we know very well that, for instance, it's not the same communism as it is in Vietnam, with all inequality. If any of us we have been there, we have seen this. But also, it has a great value for certain countries, especially in the global south, in Spain, in Mexico, in Chile, and so on, because it represented the unique opportunity to fight the heteropatriarchy. And I think perhaps one of the let's say, common points that somehow connects the different cultural imaginations of communism in the post-colonial time is this possibility of resistance against heteropatriarchy and brutality implies in bodies, in possibility for personal developments, and so on and so forth. I have nothing to do with Paulina Flores. I really mean it, but immediately I think it's a very good representation, and at least it's trying to problematize from this global South perspective, from the perspective of a young woman, what these grand narratives mean today for them. So I don't know, it's more a comment because it was kind of a serendipity that's I just read this novel a few months ago. But what I would like to leave is this very idea that perhaps one of these common points are connected through the cultural narrative of resistance against heteropatriarchy, or at least problematizing via certain ideologies of, somehow freedom and resistance, this reaction or this resistance to these grand narratives.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to reading this novel. And I was thinking, as you were saying, about of the indigenous women in Central and South America. I would talk about there will be no decolonization without deep patriarchalization. So how the two things are absolutely connected, because if we fight against the structure of domination that need violence, that are consistential, that are not just there, just because there is a domination. I think, yes, this is how patriarchalization is, of course, a pillar of exploitation and domination. Thank you I'm looking forward to read the novel.
Great.
Can I ask
Yes, please.
But I'm not sure if my voice would be loud enough.
Do you want to, how does one make the voice loud? You can stand, do you want to stand there? I don't know how to. Yeah, you can maybe, here. You can maybe introduce yourself.
Okay.
You look at the camera.
Where is that?
Successfully look at it.
Okay. Am I looking at it?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for your interesting lecture. My name is Laura, and I'm a PhD student at Leiden University. I'm working on women's writing from Kazakhstan, so I'm from Central Asia. I'm just thinking about a lot of things, and I'm not sure if this is a question or like my overall thoughts, what I usually think about. But when you are talking about Soviet, first thing, when you're talking about anti-colonial communism and about Soviet communist and feminist interactions between women of the global South and between Russia, I'm just surprised to see the difference in perceptions, because anti-colonial communism for people in Central Asia is a start of colonial era, because that's from where the subjugation of Central Asian societies, culture starts. So Soviet experience or anti-colonial communism itself as being a big project of colonialism. That's the first thing. Secondly, about the conferences that are organized between women of the global South and between of women of communist women, or between women from the of women from the communist world. That of course includes Soviet Central Asia as well. I had the chance to work in the archives and look at the documents that are sent to African countries, to India, to represent Central Asia, because Central Asia, Soviet empire, not empire, but Soviet states, a big modern project. So Central Asia, as the east of Russian, like Russian Soviet states, was supposed to play the role of this progressive power in the context of the Cold War. So as we know, in Kazakhstan, the women who are sent to these conferences, usually people who are in power, whereas who do not represent the majority of women, like my mom, who work at the same time, who still live under patriarchal values system that creates kind of a double burden in terms of Soviet emancipation project itself. So I kind of feel that these kind of conferences where only selected few privileged women who happen to represent Central Asian women went as kind of just as for the performing certain roles, but then the actual experience is left out. And as you were saying, I very liked your idea of revolutionary feminist friendship, and I really feel you are also saying about hope that these kind of conferences kind of neglected Central Asian women's real experience, and the chance to make such revolutionary feminist friendship was missed. How do you see that we get out of such kind of dynamic and include Central Asia's experience in this dialogue that you were talking about? Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this question. Very interesting question. When I talk about anti-colonial communism, I'm not talking about necessarily what is being done in Moscow. As I have said, I want to free also that narrative from the Moscow or Paris or London or whatever narrative. I want to bring them back from the South also. I mean, anti-colonial communism, the one we saw, that one existed from the people, from the activists, and that we see in Madagascar, in South Africa, in Sudan, in other countries, cannot be just reduced to what Moscow wanted. I mean, so we have also to differentiate that. There is not just one anti-colonial communism that is being, of course, directed and is part of the civilizing mission of the Soviet Union. We have that civilizing mission of the Soviet Union, but we do have also an anti-colonial communism that is not dependent on Moscow, that is born in the country itself and is absolutely rest on their own understanding, and they did not necessarily follow the Moscow line nor the Beijing line. There was also all this movement of a lot of communist parties in the global south wanted to free themselves either from Beijing or from Moscow, did not want to be part of any hegemonic place and institution. So we have to pay attention to that. That one thing. The fact that effectively you say that women from Central Asia were just a selected few and a privileged one, that is certainly true. But for us also, there is also the individual, I mean, were these women transformed nonetheless from their encounter, or were they just, effectively being seen as a just uniform group that was, that in fact just, was the party line? That's possible, but this is effectively the position of Central Asia as a colonial territory within the Soviet Union. So it was not the majority of women, but it was a lot. I mean, from what I know of a lot of countries in the global south, because of what, this were the friend of my mother, they were not from the privileged few. They did not arrive, from a selected. They were effectively, Black women, brown women. Finally, Angela Davis, the anecdote I told about Angela Davis, these are the contradiction of the communist movement. And this contradiction have to be effectively, you're right, being analyzed from our position of feminism, but not from the North position, not from the narrative from the anti-communist or liberal narrative. I mean, without the Soviet Union, with all its contradiction, and I agree with you, and all the problem, and its own modernizing, civilizing mission on its territory or outside of its territory, in its own relation with Asian country and African country, that is true. But if we look also from another point of view, without the support of the Soviet Union, the Algerian, liberation movement, the liberation movement in South Africa, the liberation movement in different countries will not have been, received support. So these contradictions are contradiction, and we have to look at them. So I'm not proposing like a nice narrative of anti-colonial communism. I say that anti-colonial communism made possible for women of color to travel and to meet other women and to build revolutionary friendship, like the one between Angela Davis and Gertie Archimede, two Black women who had no reason to meet, like not whatsoever, with a country, I mean, the country they were citizens of, will not have allowed that encounter at all. Guadeloupe was a French colony, or post-colony or whatever, and Angela Davis had been condemned to death by her own country. So I'm talking about also this narrative that we have to take to bring difference. So I'm not saying communism, saying that Soviet Union was good. I'm talking about all the different aspects, and the role also we could look about what China play or Vietnam play, of all this important at one moment. This I'm talking about. The patriarchal society existed everywhere, not in Central Asia, and they are still existing. What these women were able, in this movement, were able to do was to build also a different feminism from white feminism, where the women who participated in all the meeting in 45, 47, and after that cannot just be reduced by just puppet of the nation state. Some of them were certainly, and were coming to present the party line, but not all of them. So I think our responsibility as historians has to impact, to show this contradictory position and to present different histories than just, effectively within an hegemonic narrative. I'm just trying to talk today about anti-colonial communism because of the reduction of communism in Europe to the fight between, the free world and the non-unfree world. The Cold War had terrible consequences for many countries in the global south. Terrible consequences of dictatorial leadership, of extraction, capitalism, and militarization. Indian Ocean became totally militarized during that moment, and it's still today absolutely covered with, U.S. military base and other, and with affecting women in the global south. So I agree with you that there should not be an hegemonic narrative, but that at the same time we should look at all these different pieces, fragment, and cannot, reduce that to just, anti-colonial communism to being just the puppet of Soviet Union policies.
Thanks. We have a question from Mia. Mia, do you want to?
Yes. Thank you, and thanks so much, Françoise. Vergès. I find this absolutely fascinating how you're now prizing apart these entanglements, and as historians or art historians, in my case, I'm grappling with this also, that terms shift, that if we talk about irreducibilities and sort of anti-orthodox stances in various ways, that sometimes, there might be a consensus emerging about, for example, tolerance or something like that, which would have been rather useful, or was several centuries ago, and so on, and which becomes another orthodoxy and then is used to bolster the hegemony and so on. In decolonial writing, Mignolo and Walsh also pay attention to not the content, but the structures, and letting the ways in which thought and institutions and so on are organized speak. It's such a difficult thing to grasp because the terms slip out of our hands when we try to do that. How would you, deal with my trepidations here?
Well, thank you. Well, for me, this question of how we unlearn to learn, the process of unlearning, so to learn, and the way in which we have to re-educate our senses, is very important. I'm just saying, because I will just very briefly say something that quite often I bring as an example. When I was the president of the committee for the memory and history of slavery in France, a lot of French were telling me our ancestors were neither slave trader nor slave owner. So that's very sad, very bad story, but we have nothing to do with it as person. And in fact, it was, so my point was like, how do I tell them how they are embedded in that history without giving them fact and data, because they will listen, but so what? So I took the question. I took a painting as an example, and I took I organized guided visit in the Louvre. And the Louvre is really like the 18th century, right? 18th century French, Dutch, Italian painting. This is because the collection ended in 1848. What is left is at the Musée d'Orsay. And 18th century is really when the slave trade is at its highest. 17th century is like 30,000 African deported per year. In 18th century, we jumped to 40s, 50,000, even more per year. And this is a moment also of the American Revolution, French Revolution, English Revolution, and of course, Asian Revolution, but which is always marginalized. Anyway, to make a story short, my point was to say, okay, how through painting I can tell the French that their history is their history and not just about the slave owner. So I look, and this is a question of what is under our eyes and we don't see. So we was to look for the first painting in European painting when we see men, bourgeois men, aristocrat men, being on the painting smoking with a pipe. And this is the end of 17th century. Or, by the end of the 17th century, you see also representation of an English family with the 40. So there was a tea service and, everything was just sugar. So at one point, the product of slavery, colonial slavery, enter representation, the representation of the self in European painting, in European art. That is important to show oneself or the family with a teapot or a coffee pot or sugar or a coffee cup, and you have a lot of them at one point. So it penetrates the representation of the self. So it's not just about, what's happening in the plantation, it's in that world, in the world we are living. And this painting were in the Louvre, and art historian of the Louvre did not see that. And at the beginning, when I was telling them, they told me, but this is not a painting about slavery. And I said, of course, it's not a painting about slavery. This is not what I'm telling you. It's about the fact in the way in which slavery penetrate and the condition become invisible. It's the commodity that is represented. And by representing the commodity, you are able to hide the condition of production, as we used to say. And so you do have an incredible representation of and you have very few representation of the slave. The representation of the slave come with abolitionism in 19th century. It's British abolitionism that create the aesthetic of the torture, of the damaged body and so on, and therefore will be about the image of suffering also, as I say, and not necessarily the condition of production.
Yeah.
So it is question between, showing and hiding.
Yeah, that is most fascinating. You took me to be the art historian and so on. I very much appreciate you taking people to or using art as a show and tell kind of thing. What I was aiming at more, I suppose, was the entanglement of contemporary theoretical our lives basically as academics, speaking English and so on and so forth, or our legacies, I suppose, are leftist thinkers, Marxian thinkers and so on, who have flirted with communism and socialism and so on, in such a way that it is still a little bit uncomfortable in global theoretical circles to say that there were, not just right-wing dictatorships and fascism and so on, but also left-wing ones that didn't do people that many more favors, while we still want to use certain Marxian derived concepts and so on.
Okay. I see. Well, this is a question of whiteness, if we could say. It's a question of whiteness. And it's also perhaps because decolonization is still be seen as for the colonized people, for the oppressed people, and not, as Aimé Césaire argued in Discourse on Colonialism, about also the colonized society. What made Europe white? What made Europe wealthy and rich? And how, as a person, as a white person in Europe, can I dismantle that? What is my work? So it's not about saving women and men elsewhere, but about what happened at my door. So as effective, this is and leftist thinker, as again, I will go back to Césaire or even to Fanon, say that when Césaire talk about the shock in return, of the boomerang effect of slavery and colonialism, he say that race cannot stay over there; it come back and contaminate, insinuate itself in a Europe which was already totally, anti-Semitism is part of European foundation. So the racist foundation, the racial foundation of Europe has to be effectively dismantled, and that has to be done by Europeans themselves. That is the work of either the left or contemporary. I mean, this is how Europe was made white, and why white Europe still exists and is still very important to save for so many, party today. I mean, the rise of fascism and other forms of xenophobic politics is a sign of a white Europe that notice it's being, shifting. There is a shift on its soil, not just about, anti-colonial struggle elsewhere, as in in the second part of the second half of the 20th century, but today here, the fight of queer, the fight of decolonial, of migrant, of refugee, of trans, of sex. I mean, all this is now here. And so suddenly there is a total anxiety about, oh my God, we have to decolonize ourselves. To what made us, why should I remain white? What are my interests? What are the privileges that being white bring me? And not to be under guilt against, going back to Audre Lorde, the guilt does not, is not useful in the struggle for dignity and freedom. But what should I do? How should I stop as a person, citizen of that country? How should contribute to dismantling the complicity of my country to imperialism and capitalism elsewhere? How Europe continue to live, to have a good life. We, as we speak now, as I say in my first remark, how we continue to live sank. I mean, because 2/3 of the world is being dispossessed and exploited. So this is the the challenge of dismantling whiteness today, and the entanglement of that effectively of the current of being European today as we speak, and how it's entangled with a past of exploitation, and a present of exploitation, and a future in which Europe dream of saving itself from what's happening elsewhere, of reinforcing Fortress Europe, of building more walls and making the Mediterranean a cemetery for migrants. So this is what I think can be discussed. I mean, is the horizon in Europe today in which people of color are contributing, people of color who are European today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Françoise. We have a question in the chat box. Can you see it? I'm going to read it out. So it's from Juan David. Thank you, Françoise. Very illuminating presentation. I'd like to ask, is colonial time the same as modernity? It has been understood as such in decolonial Latin American perspectives. And I wonder whether modernity and progress, as we have understood them, is the master's house that we need to dismantle. Connected to this, how are we to discuss time in terms that do not reinforce a teleological notion of universal progress?
Mm-hmm. Wow. And I have to answer that in how long?
Well, we have 2 days, but now
but
5 minutes. 5 minutes, maximum 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes.
That is the horizon for now.
This is
But
the
I think
horizon.
I think it's a great question, and it's something we will explore throughout the workshop. Really.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very important question.
Right.
Yes, I do think that colonial time and modernity time and modern time are conflated. I mean, modernity, what we call modernity, is inseparable from the colonization, from European colonization. For Europe of thinking itself as effectively the continent which set up time, which set up a temporality of Middle Age, and this and that to today. This is absolutely clear. So an understanding of time in which Europe is leading history towards progress. And therefore, so in Europe, there is not always the idea that other people are not human. They can be human, but not equal. And that is very important, as that that anti-slavery did not mean anti-racism. Anti-colonialism in Europe did not mean anti-racism. You could be abolitionist and racist. You could be against colonialism and racist. So the modernity, I mean, the roots of modernity are deeply racial, even for people, as I say, for those philosophers or other who were against slavery or against colonization, but who were racist. So racism is really, yes, there is a deep racial construction of the world in Europe. It's deeply connected, according to the historian who have worked on that, deeply connected with the formation of Europe itself and the formation of the constant anxiety about distinction, that perhaps, find echoes in different society, but very deeply in Europe, of distinguish what we belong to that class or that caste versus other. That and an incredible construction of genealogies, of like who belong, of also the anxiety about who is marrying whom, of passing, the incredible anxiety in slave society about who is passing, who is there a black person passing for white. I mean, this constant reconstruction of whiteness is very important. And through that reconstruction of the national narrative, and that we say today in Europe through the Islamophobia. I mean, for instance, in France, Frenchness is regularly reconstructed through opposition to the veiled woman. The veil, I mean, every time there is incredible, hysteria about a veiled woman walking by. And through that, the idea of freshness is reconstructed, because there is constantly whiteness and freshness reconstructed. So modernity and progress and the Master House. Yes, the Master House was both a site of incredible, we could say not modern at all in some, not unmodern in the way in which modernity wanted, it was also the promise of liberty, equality, fraternity to bring, to take the French motto. So it was both wanted that, and at the same time, the site of incredible cruelty and brutality. So these two things that progress, I mean, modernity, progress, and violence are deeply, in fact, entangled with each other. So this, the dismantling of the Master House is a dismantling of this idea of modernity and progress. And the last question about time, oh my God, I have forgotten. What was it about time? Remind me very quickly. Well, my time is running, I have just 1 minute.
Yeah, well, how are we to discuss time in terms that do not reinforce the teleological notion of
yes. Okay. Because I do think that time, I mean, that the difficulty is like to think about entangled temporality, as I say, and at the same time, the struggle is quite often in terms of binary struggle. So the binary is not about time necessarily, but about, who is the enemy and against whom we have to fight. So we have to the time is a time of entangle, of the constant movement. There is no commodity today produced without a part of enslaved production. So we constantly have this, I mean, as if had not changed since 15th century, and it has changed at the same time. So we have to work constantly. And so the decolonial time for me is this time in which if this question of linear is totally refused, because we have, I mean, it's more the time of reparation, a temporality about repair and care. So this is different. And as I say, then thinking about what is irreparable and how we're going to live with the irreparable. And second, at the same time, to think in terms of spatial binary. I mean, like that there are effectively space is being segregated. Space, the capitalist racial space is segregation. So there are two spaces, and we have to, as Fanon said, the colonial city has to be attacked. So we have to work between time and space in which it's at the same time we constantly work on different temporality. Whereas patriarchal capitalist time work on one temporality, we work on this different temporality constantly. So I will say a decolonial time is a constant negotiation among different temporality in which what is the time of the urgency, build a refuge, build, create false paper, whatever we have to do now, and at the same time constantly the work of the horizon of decolonial movement, of the decolonial movement of decolonization, depatriarchalization, and post-racism. And I went over my 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think we will probably have to wrap up, but thanks, Françoise. Thanks so much for thinking along, and I think we have a lot of fodder to carry on with us in the subsequent panels. And I think we have a break now for half an hour, a coffee break, and then we gather again here for the first panel.
It's less than half an hour.
Oh, less than half an hour. We have less than half an hour.
Something a bit more than 15 minutes, but less.
A bit more than 15 minutes, but less than half an hour. That's what we have for coffee.
Well, sorry to have shortened your break.
We will bring coffee inside. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And good work.
Yes, and do feel free to join us for the next sessions, Françoise. We will be back at 12.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.